Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I am still on the road traveling, so still not my usual studio setup. So again, I apologize if the audio or video quality is impacted in any way, but today we're going to get into something that I always think is great to talk about. Great in the sense that my heart really goes out to those who spent time in the prison system in any form or any time. We've talked a lot on the show about reforming the mental health side of prison, the faith side of prison. Huge respect to all those who are called to serve the faith-based community within prison, those pushing our government and our systems to do mental health reform because there's a lot that is wrong with that system. I've had a lot of guests on the show talk about it who serve time. So we're going to get into this today with a man who actually wrote a book while in prison. I think that's really unique and really awesome in the sense that it is so important to capture that in the moment and to share this because sharing these stories is what helps. Again, just what we usually say on the show is that when we recover loudly, we stop others from dying quietly. And I think that is a huge thing that
Mm.
happens to a lot of people who get out of the system. So, Mr. Daniel Gray, a long intro there, but it's a little bit about you, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more on top of that as well.
Hey, so first off, thank you very much for having me. So I am Daniel Gray. To give you my past, I'll just kind of unpack sort of my origin story, I guess. I was born in Blackpool, England. I came to America when I was 7 years old. I've lived everywhere from Texas to Taiwan. I spent 3 years in Taiwan, Australia. I've had a background in martial arts for years. I've done that as well. What I'm most known for is I am one of the January 6th defendants. I was arrested in May 17, 2021. I had a 4 year indictment process with the DOJ. Eventually, I did enter a plea. I took responsibility for my actions. I ended up in federal prison. And while in federal prison, I sat down. I made sense of everything that I was going through. I had a very, very tough past that I went through a divorce, had some serious addiction problems. So I ended up in prison, and actually, it was probably the best thing that could ever happen to me. And I sat down in prison. I wrote a book, and I got out actually a year ago today. I was released from prison. Since then, I've been working on getting my book finished. It's finished now. I'm working on getting my book out there, just doing some speaking and so forth. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Now, I'm sure that many people have heard of January 6th, but maybe not all are familiar with what exactly happened, especially those of us who try to avoid politics in the news. Could you just give us a little background on that so that we have a better understanding of your role in that and kind of why you were there and kind of how that impacted your time?
So the 2020 election in American politics was very, very divisive. It was a very difficult election. There was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of on both sides. It was a very confusing time. And I was one of the people who I believed the election it wasn't legitimate. I was living outside of Fulton County in Georgia at the time. I was sleeping on the floor of a friend's apartment. And I had an issue with all the mail-in ballots that were showing up. I'm listening to the president, and he's going on. He's talking about how they're using mail-in ballots to steal the election. I'm living in a place where they had 13 or 14 mail-in ballots show up. I watched the election that night. I watched some things that I thought were kind of suspicious, and so I got into it. I got into the doom scrolling side of it. I got into the deep conspiracy parts, where the Epstein Island and the shadow governments and the QAnon conspiracy world. And at the time I'd gone through a lot, and that kind of became an identity for me. It was coming out of COVID too. I'd lost my work, and so I really dug in. And I'm kind of a I kind of have a unique view on politics because I was a registered Democrat up until the Trump administration, and now I've kind of withdrawn from politics. But so there was this election. There was all this questioning about it, and it seemed like none of the courts wanted to actually review the cases. And I found myself being very frustrated. I'm posting on social media. All of a sudden, I'm getting censored on social media. And I take this as kind of like I'm on to something. I feel like I'm over the target because
Right.
obviously it was the first time on social media they were censoring people. This is disinformation. You can't post this. And so I'm like, oh, wow. Obviously, COVID and the election were the only two things they were censoring people about. And so the president calls everybody up. He says, hey, there's going to be this huge protest on January 6th. It's going to be wild and all this stuff. And I took it as a rallying cry. I said, I'm going. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, hey, I'm going to this protest and I don't care if you fire me. We had a back and forth. And the next thing I hopped a flight to DC. And I arrived the night before. I stayed in an Airbnb. I met up with some friends. And that was kind of how I got there. I mean, if you want me to go further, I can kind of unpack the whole day. But I end up at the protest. It takes forever. It's freezing cold. I'm wearing Converse. My feet are soaking wet. I just remember being very uncomfortable. And the president comes out about an hour later, He was behind schedule. Talked for like an hour and a half, kind of going over these platitudes and these numbers, and it was kind of like a very unimpressive. I hate to say unimpressive speech, but it was kind of underwhelming for what I expected. And the next thing you know, he tells everybody, "Let's go march to the Capitol, and we're going to protest this the certification of this election." And so we all marched down Pennsylvania Avenue. It's like 1 million people. And to preface that, I've worked in nightclubs, I've done concerts, like large 80,000 person venues. I've never in my life seen a crowd move like that. I mean, it was just like Pennsylvania Avenue and the lawn. It just was a sea of people moving. And a lot of people they have mixed views about January 6th. It depends on what side of the political spectrum you fall on. But in that moment, it was a very celebratory thing. I mean, people were dressed like Uncle Sam, people were singing YMCA. I'm one of the people who did get indicted, but most people who went there, they didn't behave like I behaved. I have to say that. And so we end up at the front of the protest. I'm with a group of friends, and I go to, well, anyways, it's dead silence. You can hear a pin drop, and nobody's cell phones are working. So we're all just kind of sitting out there wondering what's going to happen next. And at some point, about 10 people in the crowd, they had these bullhorns, and they all yell out, "Pence betrayed us." And the crowd just pops. And there's a commotion at the very front. There's a barricade. There's protesters. There's police on the opposite side. And I see a commotion. So I decide I make my way to the very front of the protest. And I go and I had this stupid thought where I'm like, I'm going to take a photo of the police and the protesters. I'm going to post it on my Instagram. I go to take my phone out, I place it up. I have a police officer reach up, they snatch my phone, I get pepper sprayed in the eyes. And I went back, I cleared my eyes out, I just lost my temper. And it's one of those moments where I look back on it and I'm like, that one moment right there could have saved me a lot of trouble. It could have saved me 4 or 5 years. I get back up, I put my back to the police, I get pushed to the front line, I end up on a staircase. When I look back at the case, it looks like it was about 25 minutes that I was in that crowd. But for me, my memory is about 3 seconds. I do remember being on a staircase. I remember some police pushing. I remember getting hit with a canister of tear gas. I ran up a staircase and through a tunnel. I ended up at the front door of the Capitol. And this video has been viewed like probably 100 million times. I'm at the very front of the West Terrace entrance. It's 2:45 p.m. We're arguing with the Capitol Police, and all of a sudden they turn around. They just walk us in the building. And so I just follow them in, and I go inside the building. I see the officer who I believe stole my cell phone. I ask for my cell phone back. I have the body worn camera. I'm literally begging, "Hey, can I have my cell phone back, please?" Eventually, they play that video in front of Congress during the January 6th mission. There's a commotion. There's some pushing. There's one person in between me and the officer. The officer swings the baton at me. I put my hand up. I block the baton. I don't even realize I do this. 14 seconds later, the officer falls down the stairs. I end up leaving. I go home. I go back to work the next day. I hop a flight. I go back to work, and nobody at my job is looking at me. So I kind of realize I'm in a lot of trouble at this point. It's a big news story. There's even a billboard that's like, "We have a reward for anybody who's involved in this." So I leave Atlanta. I go back to Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm on the run from the FBI now. Like, how did this happen? I'm on the run from the FBI. And May 17th, I'm driving to the beach. I'm on Florida Avenue on 3rd Street, and I see police cars behind me. I assume somebody behind me is getting pulled over. They pull behind me. Now I know I'm getting pulled over. And all of a sudden, it's like, "Driver, stop your car, come out the vehicle with your hands up." I completely think this is a mistaken identity. I've kind of forgotten about dude. It's so funny when I'm thinking about it now, but I'd forgotten about January 6th at the time, so I thought that it had nothing to do with me. So I walk back towards the sound of their voice. I lay on the ground. I get handcuffed. I sit up, and I see all these FBI agents, and I'm just like, "Oh my goodness, this is really happening." The next day, I go to court, and I find out I'm facing 37 and a half years in prison. And then I'm released, and they set me free, and they say, "Come back in a week, and here's a bag of Burger King." The FBI, they're actually really nice to me. But that's the full story of my involvement in January 6th.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because what reason have they to snatch your phone away, right? Where's the freedom of press and that, right? And it's nothing new, right? You look at even today, this morning, what was on the news, right? Protests are still happening. They're inside of churches now, right? That's the biggest
Yeah.
controversy right now that's happening. There are protests left and right. It really doesn't matter who's in charge. I guess the bigger question is, does our involvement in politics, does standing by our principles and what we want to see happen and what we believe in, is it worth risking our life? And ultimately it comes down to like, what can you change? Because I've had a lot of disagreements and arguments with people who really separated our relationships because of global politics or huge issues. And I said, at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
why separate us? What can we do, right? I focus on what can I do in my local community. Beyond that, what can I do maybe on the county side or the state side, or what kind of mission can I do in a foreign country? Which again, you're still localized to whatever area, right? Let's say you want to go on a mission to Africa to help, right? You're going to help that one portion of the population, not the whole country. And so many
Hmm.
people allow stuff to separate them, family, relationships. I mean, in fact, when President Trump won the election, there was a whole slew of relationships that ended, marriages, people,
Hmm.
the whole dating scene changed, right? And all for what? I said for 3 or 4 years from now, for you two to look back and be like, well, that was kind of stupid because what did we end up arguing over? What really changed in our lives? So I think it's
Yeah.
important to have your morality and principles, but there comes a degree where it's like, is what I'm doing even having an impact? And is there a way I can still live by my principles, but also not risk myself? So I think that's what it comes down to. And I think a lot of people are so misconstrued right now because they want to complain so much about something that they didn't vote for or that they aren't involved with. And it's like all this complaining with no action it just annoys me personally. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I can really, really speak to that because I've suffered the consequences of being radically politicized. And I guess the easiest way for me to explain this is I look at my situation and I look at everything that I went through. And I got myself involved in this protest. I got myself involved in the riot portion of it. I take accountability for that. Of course, I was going to get in some trouble for it. I never saw it turning into a 37.5 year indictment, a 4 year indictment, all the media attention that I got from it. And I ended up in prison. I ended up sitting down and I'm writing a book about all this, and I'm unpacking all my thoughts, and I'm trying to be as honest as I possibly can be about it. And then at some point, Trump gets reelected. It's business as usual. It's gridlock as usual. It's division as usual. Back in DC again. And I sit there and I think, I really could have just sat that out, couldn't I? Like I really could have just avoided
Right.
this whole thing. I mean, what was the point of me getting involved in this to this level? Was it really worth me losing 4 years of my life? Was it really worth all the attention that I got? I believe in the grace of God, and I believe that ultimately it worked for good. It wasn't essentially good, but it did work for good because it pulled me out of some really, really tough places, addiction, some really, really divisive mindsets. And it helped me get to a place where I'm comfortable and life is good again. But I look back and I almost don't recognize myself. It's funny. I have so many friends. I'm in the martial arts world. So I've been in gyms for years. And if you're in the martial arts world, you're going to be around people that you don't agree with because that's the nature of the beast. It's just a big melting pot. And I've just great, lovely friends that I know that are on the left that have come to me and been like, we're really proud of the way that you come through all this thing and you kind of taken ownership of your situation. And it's right. I see some of the stuff that's happening in Minnesota and with the protesting with the ICE, and it's not just protesting; it's people getting themselves physically involved and not really understanding the consequences that come with that. And there was a situation with a lady in Jacksonville recently where she punched an officer. And I'm following that case, and I'm not following it out of maliciousness. I'm following it because I actually genuinely care what happens to her. Because you end up in a situation where you end up like almost radicalized, and you feel like you're doing what's right, but then all of a sudden now you're facing an indictment and you're facing real time in prison, and the amount of people who care about you initially is huge. But the more and more that you get into this case, the more you realize I'm the one that's going to prison here. I'm the one that's going to spend time in prison. And people don't realize if you place yourself at odds with the federal government, you are going to get the screws. And that's even in the Bible. I mean, I think Paul talks about how governments are a terror to those who oppose them. And that's the absolute truth. And even under the reign of Nero, he was telling people that we're supposed to obey our government. It doesn't really matter who our leadership is. Even as Christians, we're just supposed to accept that that's on some level that's our government. And so, to your point, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that when you outsource your morality and you sort of place it on, you take your eyes off Jesus Christ and you place it on political leaders, and you say, I want this person to be my leader and so forth, and I'm willing to take action for that. It's going to come at a very heavy price if you're not careful. And I hope people will look at my situation and see it as cautionary tale.
And most interesting to me, I find it ironic. The number one thing we are called to do for political leaders is pray for them. And most people who are trying to take action or are arguing or conspiracying and all that, none of them are actively praying for our leaders. Like that's step one. That is the
Mm-hmm.
first thing we're supposed to
Step
do.
one.
And in accordance to the book of Daniel and other historical accounts in the Bible, like a lot of demonic forces are behind the leadership in a lot of countries, right? Not that the people
Mm-hmm.
themselves are evil, but a lot of them that like Satan's plan is to divide and conquer. He's a slanderer, he is deceitful, he is he who dwells among the
Mm-hmm.
dust, right? That is his plan. And so that's what we're seeing. I heard denomination just means demon in a nation. And it's not just religions, it's countries and cities, right? And so what we are supposed to do is pray for our leaders first and foremost. And so many people aren't doing that. And that's praying whether you like them or not. Pray for
Yeah.
just as you're supposed to pray for your enemy and your neighbor, you're supposed to pray for the leaders you like and you don't like. pray that they would,
Hmm.
if there's someone who you feel like is against what is in alignment with the Bible, you're supposed to pray that the scales would be removed from their eyes, that they would have encounters with Christ in their life through people, through the Word, and through Jesus Himself, that would turn their leadership into a better and more aligned direction. And so that's if you want to take action, that's the first action you need to take. And
Hmm.
so many people don't do that. So I just want to put that out there as a reminder. And then you did end up serving time, as you mentioned. And during that time, you wrote a memoir. So I want to start first with you talked about prison being a catalyst for change in your life, for reflection in your life. Was it pretty instant? Did it take quite a while in there for you to start to reflect on things? How was that time when you were there?
So I'll back it up about 2 years before that, just to kind of give you the full sort of narrative arc with me. And so I end up homeless back in Jacksonville. It's about a year after the January 6th indictment. I'm having real trouble finding jobs. I'm struggling with alcohol. It's just hard to get traction. Imagine a situation where you're trying to reestablish yourself in life, and you also understand that you're probably going to prison soon. So it's kind of like, do I pursue a career? Do I try and find a home, because I don't even know if I'm going to
Right.
be there next year? And I end up bartending. I'm a bartender by trade, a martial artist by trade. I do sales as well. But I take a bartending job, and I end up meeting a woman. And she was a very left leaning African American, heavily tattooed woman that I ended up meeting. She's part of the LGBTQ plus community too. And we just hit it off. And yeah, on her second date, I said, "Hey, I'm one of the January 6th defendants." I wasn't sure how that was going to go over. And she literally like leaned forward and started screaming at me, like, "I was yelling at you on the TV that day." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'm in a lot of trouble." But for some reason, we ended up dating, and she moved me into her apartment, and she gave me a place to live. She made sure that I was okay. And it wasn't just that, but she stood by my side during my indictment for 3 years, almost 3 years, to the point of being there when I pled guilty, being there when I was sentenced, writing letters to the judge. And so imagine the scenario I'm in, where I have all these people on the right that are like kind of giving me this, I hate to say hero worship, but that kind of is what it is. And then people on the left are very divided and kind of against me. And now I'm living with, like, I would like to say, like a militantly left leaning woman, and she's like all I've got. So at some point, I just kind of like I kind of got off put by my decision making. I got off put by the conspiracy world. I got off put by just everything, just the enormity of the situation. And I looked at it like we had a really good hard fight with the DOJ. I had a really good public defender. I was facing 37 years. I got sentenced to 30 months. Like, we had a really strong case, but it was built around asking for leniency and taking a plea agreement. That's kind of how the feds work. And so, the long answer for that is, before I even went to prison, I was long done with this. I kind of wanted to walk away from it, but there's no getting away from the consequences of your action. So going into prison, I already had this new mindset of, like, I'm going to get through this time. I'm going to do something productive, and when I get out of prison, I'm going to be a completely different person. And so when I got to prison, that was my mindset. I'm not. I don't want to tie myself to the politics of this. The election's coming up. The president's talking about pardoning us. The opposition is very strongly using January 6th as kind of what they're hinging the election on. So being in prison was kind of nice. We didn't have a whole lot of television. We didn't have a whole lot of social media. I would spend 12 hours a day doom scrolling during my case. And so I didn't have social media anymore. And I was just in there, and I picked up a pen and paper, and I started writing. And so at the time that I actually sat down and began to write the memoir, my mindset had completely shifted. I completely let go of radical politics, or politics in general. I did care about the outcome of the election. I can't lie about that, because obviously there was a pardon on the table for me. But outside of that, I just completely wanted to be done with it. And so in the book, you'll see me talk about this over and over again. Of like, oh my goodness, I'm so committed to this election that I want nothing to do with anymore. I want to just move on with my life. I've made my mistakes, but I do want to have a future after this too. And that's why prison was like, initially it was a very enjoyable experience. I hate to say that about prison. I don't want to like glamorize prison, but just
Right.
going from what I was going from to that situation, it actually was a lot of relief. I had a bed to sleep in. I had consistent food. I had access to. I could sit down and write. I wasn't tied to politics anymore. And so the first 4 6 months in prison, I kind of skated through it. I was going to the gym. I was working out every day. I was in church. I made some good friends in there. And as the election approached, it got real divisive in prison. That's kind of the nature of prison. If it's a basketball game, if it's a Super Bowl, whatever it is, the entire prison is going to pick a side, because there's nothing else to do. So they hinge themselves on whatever the current event is. And so I'm in prison with people who are very strongly supporting me, and I'm in prison with people who are very vocally against me. And I'm tied to this person. I'm like, obviously I want President Trump to win, but it's for personal reasons. It's because I was hoping that I would ultimately get pardoned if he got elected. And so that's a lot of the book hinges on that. There's a portion where I talk about the people who were kind of not wanting things to go well for me versus the people who were supporting me, how I was navigating all this. And so just the unbelievable stress that came out of that. I mean, I think probably the hardest day of my life was the day before the election. It was just overwhelmed with people walking up to me, asking my opinion, and I don't want to give it because I've just been talking and talking. And so yeah,
Right.
prison was kind of a mixed bag for me, is the best way to put it.
I get that because you kind of went in there with a specific label attached to you already that you had to kind of try to avoid. And it's like, did most people know? Because I've never been, and I hope I never go. Do people know why you're in there? Or it's kind of like they ask you, and it's like you either answer or you don't kind of thing.
Word spreads pretty quickly, and
Yeah.
I was placed into I was what you call like a high profile inmate, and so I had a national security threat designation on me. The way my case went, not to over explain how the feds work, but I ended up with camp points, which means I got a very low sentencing from the judge. The judge kind of looked at me and she said my chance of recidivism was zero. She took my side on a lot of things.
Wow.
I did really well in court with her. Yeah, and so she basically set me up for success. She gave me a very low sentence. She gave me a very easy prison time to do. So I was sent to Jessup FSL, which is a federal satellite low. And normally I'd be in a camp, right? But because I had a national security threat designation, I had to have a fence around me. And so I'm in there with a very unique group of people. I'm in there with people who are very high profile. I was in there with actually Kenny Sharpton Glasgow. He's the brother of Al Sharpton. He's actually a friend of mine. We met in church. I was in there with a lot of like the narco drug runners. I'd say about half the prison was from South America. There were a
Hmm.
lot of people who couldn't go into general population because they had like SA charges and stuff like that. So I'd say about a third of the prison were people who either, I hate to say, snitch on the gang, or they had paperwork that was bad, so they couldn't go to other prisons. And so the prison I was in was like, it was a peaceful prison because nobody wanted to leave there. Because leaving there for a lot of people meant that you were going to get a lot of trouble if you went to a medium security prison where they had a different code of ethics. And so yeah, when I arrived, I walk in and it's like a series of doors to change, and they keep unlocking and unlocking until I end up inside the prison yard. And a guy walks up to me and goes, "Hey, are you a January 6th offender?" I look at him, I'm like, what do you mean? How'd you know that? He goes, "We only get a few type of inmates around here." And so inside the prison, there were, I think, over time, there were 5 or 6 other defendants that were also January 6th defendants. But I never had any trouble at all in prison. I mean, I was treated really well. I was given a lot of respect. People kind of stayed out of my way. I also didn't bother anybody. I never gambled. I never got myself into anything that was going to cause me any trouble.
Right.
I looked at my time. The nature of my sentencing meant that I was going to spend about a year and a half in prison, then be released without the president being involved, anyways. So for me, it was I'm in here. I'm keeping my nose clean. I'm not getting involved in anybody. Anything that's divisive, I'm not arguing with anybody. I'm not getting involved. So yeah, when I arrived, pretty much the first thing people figured out was I was one of the January 6th defendants. They do have cell phones upstairs in prison. They have a thing called Pacer where they can pull your paperwork. So people obviously pull my paperwork. They obviously Google me too. And if you Google me, I have like a lot of articles and stuff that the media did about me. So
Right.
people pretty quickly knew who I was. Yeah.
Okay. Find it not to compare at all, but similar to boot camp, my mentality was like, we're not going to risk anything that could set us back, right? And put us through
Yeah.
this whole program or even 2 weeks. But you had people who would say, hey, I want to risk redoing boot camp because I want to try to get this girl's phone number or I want to steal this type of food over some of the silliest stuff. And it's like, even people
Yeah.
who were trying to have sex, it's like, boot camp is what about 2 months, depending on what branch you do and what's going on at the time, and they're always changing the cycle. But it's like about 2 months. You need alcohol or sex that bad that, and most of these are high schoolers, mind you, like they're 17, 18, 19 years old that you are
Yeah.
willing to risk another 2 months here. Like there were people who got in huge trouble for distilling the hand sanitizer during the COVID boot camp era and making alcohol, just straight alcohol on the toilet and it being wasted. And it's just ridiculous. There was people who during the COVID time would fake COVID symptoms just to be quarantined again. But this wasn't like a fun quarantine like you're at a hotel room and watching TV. This was at, if you were quarantined at boot camp, you've got this like bagged lunch that is like a single slice of bologna between bread. You've got no food. You've got
Yeah.
drill instructors patrolling like I would say it felt very akin to prison. You've got no windows. You've got no phone. You've just got some military textbooks to read. You've got people who,
Mm-hmm.
whenever they want, can beat you. And what that means for people who are civilians, they can force you to do a set of workouts that is supposed to be taxing, like they're beating you. They can yell at you. They can make you stand there at attention for hours at a time if they want. Why would you people rather get out of boot camp work for 2 weeks and then go back it just didn't make sense. And I know people who have repeated the whole
Yeah,
system. In fact, I told a story the other day where on the bus ride out, some recruit decided to give two middle fingers to his instructors, like, I'm out of here, and whatever he said, and they stopped the bus and sent him back
that's coming
through.
back around. Yeah,
And it's like, for me, if
yeah,
Lord willing, I don't. But if I were ever to go to prison, it's like, hey, if especially if you know you're getting out sooner rather than later, like if you're in there for life, then I get that mentality. But if you're getting out, it's like, why would you risk anything that could keep you in? It's just not worth it. And it's that instant gratification. And I think that's even going to be worse for the younger and newer generations of people in prison who are so used to the instant gratification that this world has set up, where they just have everything their way. It takes a lot
this
of
is true.
discipline and solace. And I think it's just, I've never understood that mentality. Like it's, and in the military, even they call it like reward risk, like NAV. They have their own term, like
Hmm.
risk reward. And there's a lot of high risk, low reward is what a lot of people sometimes chase after. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So, but you did
Very,
your
yeah, it's
time
very true.
quietly. And you mentioned during that time writing your memoir. Did you finish the whole book while in prison, or was it like the first rough draft and then you polished it up, or how did that work?
So I wrote I mean, I have the thing. It's a stack of papers, but so I wrote about 95% of it when I was in prison, and about the period between the election and the inauguration was a very challenging period because there was a lot of debate about who's getting pardoned, who's not getting pardoned, and we had no information, so we're just sitting inside a prison, kind of waiting. And so I stopped writing at that point because I was just so
Right.
overwhelmed with the situation. Literally, all I do is I'd get up and I'd mark a day off my calendar, and then I go work out and I try my best to sleep and just wait for the inauguration day. And the inauguration day comes, and it seems like nothing's going to happen. It's also a holiday. There's no guards there. And eventually, like we're watching, I'm with another guy who was a January 6th defendant. We're in the compound, and we're in the pavilion, and we're watching one of the TV when Trump is speaking inside of an arena in D.C. And he hasn't even mentioned us yet. And so we kind of resigned to staying in prison at that point. He comes out and he says, "To my January 6th hostages, you guys are going home tonight." I'm like, What do you mean? There's nobody even here to let us
Tonight.
out.
Well,
Yeah, and so all of a sudden, my case manager, I haven't seen her in months. She shows up, she's wearing jeans, and she just walks straight to the office. I'm like, okay, that's unique. And then the inmates, Daniel, come over here, and they call me into the office, and she's like, hey, Daniel, I have a message from the administration. You've been pardoned by the president. I just started bawling. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening.
wow.
I'm like, what does this mean? And she's like, well, no, you've been pardoned. But then there was a big dispute in the BOP of the Bureau of Prisons about were we actually going to get a pardon. I think somebody actually quit in protest. And so the whole thing lagged for like 6 hours. And they said, okay,
I
you guys aren't
believe it.
going home. Go back to your bones, lay down. And at midnight, a guy walks in with a flashlight. He's like, hey, are you Daniel? I'm like, yeah, I'm Daniel. And he goes, hey, come on, pack your stuff. You're out of here. And within 30 minutes, I'm standing outside of the prison. I've got my book in my hand and it's almost finished. But there were some things that happened when I was in prison. The woman that I was expecting to come home to, she ended up dumping me, and for good reasons. I'm not, she stood by my side
Right.
for a long time. I had nothing but respect for her, obviously. And at some point, how long do you want to be with somebody who's fighting a case for it? And so I had nowhere to go. I had no money. So I spent probably about a month and a half either sleeping on a gym floor or my friend's apartment, sleeping on the couch, and I'm watching the TV talk about us getting pardoned. And, it's not that glamorous getting out of prison. It's actually very tough. And so it took me about 3, 4 months. I had some good friends help me out. I had a good friend give me a job and give me some money in my pocket. I had another friend make sure I had clothes and everything else. And so I got my feet on the ground. And then I was like, I've got to finish this stupid book. But at the time, I had a lot of animosity in me, or was just kind of upset about a lot of different things. And I'd written a really honest, really good book. I mean, I was just proud of the work I'd done. But I didn't want to ruin it by just like at the end of it, just writing this very bitter sort of like, I'm mad at my ex, I'm mad at these people, I'm mad at the government type thing. So I waited until I could have like closure and perspective on it. And I sat down and I banged out the last chapter. It's called Bittersweet for a reason. But I just told a very honest story about like, this is what it's actually like for me right now getting out. And this is the situation I'm in. So got it done. I was like, oh, praise the Lord, this is finally over. I got it done. And then I sat there and I had no internet in my house. So I had no way of like I couldn't type it. And so I took my phone and I just talked it into my phone. I used talk to text and it took me like almost a month. And I'm just talking this book into my phone. And you got it. Remember, it talks about like I had a marriage fall apart. I had some addiction issues. I had an overdose. I had the incarceration. And so I'm like breaking down as I'm talking this into my phone because it's like so connected to me, obviously.
Right.
And I finally get it done. And I don't know what I have here. I was just okay. I've just got a bunch of words I scribbled on paper and I've talked into my phone, but I need somebody to read it. And so I sent it to a really good friend of mine. He's a writer too. He was like a CEO of a very successful company, known for martial arts. He's not a BS. I sent it to him and I said, hey man, read my book and please tell me what you think. Give me your critiques. and he was going to like Europe or something, and so I didn't expect to hear back. And I get a message back like 2 weeks later, and he's like, "Daniel, this is a really good book. You bared your soul, and it's a compelling read." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I kind of thought he was just like, "Hey, good job, Daniel. I'm proud of you for being out of prison." So we ended up talking on the phone. He goes, "No, this is actually as close to a finished book as you need. I mean, you need to fix the punctuation. There's some words that talk to text messed up in there, but like
Yeah.
really what you need is a copy editor to go through and clean it up a little bit. But it reads start to finish. The narrative arcs are all closed on it. You wrote a good book." I'm like, "There's no way. There's literally no way I sat down with a pen and paper and wrote a book from start to finish without revising it. Like I have like an eighth grade education. How's that possible?" And so I sent it to like 5 or 6 more people, and I said, "All right, tell me what you think." And every single person I sent it to was like, "I finished the book in 2 days. It's compelling. It's a really good story." And I've only read it like twice. It's hard for me to read it because it's very
Right.
emotional. And so I was like, okay, these are my friends. Let's be careful here. So I got an AI software called AutoCrit, which it's like a developmental editor. It's going to read your book and see if the narrative arc's closed, if it's well structured, if it tells a good story. And it rated it like really really high. I mean, it rated me against Steve Jobs' book. It uses a book as an example. It's also like a memoir type thing. I think it was Steve Jobs' book, and it gave me like almost an 80 out of 100, which is like a publishable work that has the potential to be successful. I'm like, there's no way I wrote a book from start to finish like this. And so I finally sent it out to. I have it with a final copy editor, somebody who can do the punctuation, because that's my big downfall. Is I can speak, I can tell a compelling story, but like I can't put a comment or replace. And
Mm.
so that's where I'm at with it now. I have a completed manuscript of it. I'm in the process of deciding. I mean, I could probably take it to self-publishing in a month, but I do think I deserve to query it a little bit just to see if there's any interest. I think being a January 6th defendant might work for me, might work against me. We'll see. But that's yeah.
For sure. I think it's super interesting because most of the very famous historical accounts of the Bible were written while in prison. A majority
Mhm.
of the greatest parts of the Bible were written while in prison, and God uses a lot of different people to write, people who would have never expected to write. But you look at Moses, and God said, and not just Moses, several prophets, God said, I will put my words into your mouth. Like, don't worry about it. Like it's in
Yeah.
you and I'm gonna draw it out of you. So I think that's such a beautiful thing. So I always tell people like never ever be afraid to write a book or a memoir or whatever it is. Just yeah, it sounds so simple, but it's like just write. And then look at it when it's done. Like take so many people, so many of the best books in the world were never published and never,
Mhm.
made because people were just afraid to take that first step. And it could have been, and the thing is too, like thinking about the impact, like who this might save a life. And ultimately it
Yeah.
doesn't matter so much the writing as the content itself. I mean, that's what the truth of the message is it the content, right? The content is what they're looking at. And sure, you can make it pretty and all of this and that, but at the end of the day, like people want the raw truth. And if it's not the best articulation, that's what it is. And I think there's so much attraction to the writing. If I read something super articulate and polished out of prison, it wouldn't feel as down to earth in prison as it should be for the message. So
Mhm.
I love the cover, the men from the medium. I'd love for you to go into that artistic choice of the goose in the uniform with the ball and chain. What role does that play?
So I was in a federal satellite low. It was mostly an outside prison. It was a very coveted prison. It's a place where people they work their way down to. Like for example, let's say you have violent charges or something like that. You get a 20-year sentence. Over time you have good behavior, good behavior, good behavior. And at some point you can move into a more open facility. And this is a place where you can bring your chair out to go watch the TV. You can wear sweatpants. You can wear tennis shoes. Most medium
Oh,
security
nice.
prisons, they're suited and booted is what they call it, and they're very disciplined. It's probably very similar to what you went through in boot camp. And so we'd have these geese that would fly into the compound every day, and they would sit outside in the compound because they knew that you ended up with a lot of bread in prison for some reason. So we'd all leave the cafeteria with bread, and then we go feed the geese. And I had this thought in my mind where I'm like, these geese are intentionally coming in here, so they don't know this is a prison. This isn't a prison to them. So why should
Mm.
it be a prison to me? And so I have the tattoo on my forearm. The book is a recreation of a tattoo that I got when I was in prison. I paid $60 in commissary. I had a guy who was yeah, it was a guy who
Nice.
was a bank robber, and he made money in prison by doing tattoos. And I thought I want to get a ball and chain with the goose on it to symbolize everything that's going on here. And
Right.
so that's kind of where the cover came from. And the reason it's called The Men from the Medium is I was in, like I said, a low security prison that you earn your way into. And we have a bus show up every Friday, and every Friday it's new people. About 20 to 50 new people show up every Friday. And normally these were South Americans because at the time we were going into South America, we were stopping the drug boats, we were arresting people, bringing them back, trying them in America, and then putting them into federal prison. And so every Friday you'd see a lot of like Venezuelans, Hondurans, this, that, and the other. And I'd say they basically ran the prison, and they kept it really orderly too, very, very peaceful because of that, because they wanted to keep the place, stay there, obviously. And then right before the election, I think about a month before the election had been decided, all of a sudden the buses changed and they started bringing people over from the media. And that's why it's called the men from the medium, because it stopped being all these people who were coming from like the South American drug runners. And it was all these guys who had been in prison for like 20 years. And a lot of these guys were people who they were caught up in the 1994 the crime bill, the drug issue they had back in the mid 90s. And so these were guys who they were crack cocaine dealers. They were people who three strikes you're out guys. A lot of them weren't violent. Some of them maybe if you're caught with like drugs and a gun, that's a 922C enhancement. So they end up catching the screws from the federal government, and these guys were getting like 20 and 30 years. And
Wow.
so you meet them, and they were 15, 20 years into a 30-year sentence. And it was really unfair because Congress had ruled that the way they were sentenced was wrong. So they changed the sentencing laws, but they didn't do it retroactively. So these guys would sit in prison and watch guys come in for the exact same charges they got, and they were getting 3 and 4 years now because it had changed. But they still had to fulfill
Yeah.
their 25-year commitment to the BOP. And so for my first thought was like, wow, you're still in prison like 20 years later for selling drugs. You're still in prison. Like, and it was only a handful of drugs. It was a couple of ounces, not like
Yeah.
a room full of drugs. And I was honestly kind of in awe of these guys because they were so peaceful. Like, and I remember this is a guy in my book. His name's Snake. He's in the book, but he would do 100. He'd do like 500 push-ups every day. And I counted them. I did the math on that, and he's like 3.5 million push-ups since he's been to prison. And he works in Unicor, and he's just a faithful Christian. He's in church every Sunday. And every time you ask him like, "Hey, how you doing, man?" He's like, "I'm blessed, man. I'm really blessed." And one time we got to talking about the case. He was asking me about my case. I asked him about his. I was like, man, I just feel like it's very unfair. And he looks at me in the eye and he says to me, he goes, yeah, but crime was really bad back then and they had to do something. And I'm just like flawed by that. I'm like, talk about like
Wow.
extreme accountability. Like this man is literally watched 50 people come and go for the same charges he got. He's given up his entire life. All of his usable working life has been in prison because of mistakes that he's taken accountability for. And they found purpose in prison. And so originally I was just kind of writing a book. And then my girl dumps me and I start reflecting. And I'm like I did 9.5 months. Like it wasn't that bad, but like I ended up losing everything and coming out of prison homeless. Boo-hoo for me. Like it wasn't the worst thing. But then I'm like, golly, this guy's been in here for 20 years and his wife has left him. His kids are adults. He has grandchildren he's never met before. But somehow he's
Man.
found a way to find peace and to seek the Lord in prison. And he reads the Bible. I know a guy who does Bible study in prison every Wednesday. His name's Cedric, and he's in there for a long time. And this guy could go toe to toe with any pastor, and he's just knowledgeable. And all he does is preach in prison. And that's the side that you don't see is that there are people who get to prison because they make mistakes when they're young, and the laws are very, very harsh at the time, and they just kind of accept their circumstances and say, well, what can a man have here? And it's being in physical shape, it's being joyful, it's worshiping the Lord, and it's knowing your Bible. And so I ended up naming the book "The Men from the Medium" because there was a huge reflection I had where I was like, you know what, I actually don't have it that bad. I'm actually very blessed compared to what they're going through. And if they can be at peace with it, then I have to be at peace with
I really like that. It's definitely a lot deeper than what I was thinking. Because I'm Mr. Whiskey, I was thinking you're Daniel Gray, the goose. Maybe they called you Gray Goose, so you're Mr. Vodka, I'm Mr. Whiskey.
That's
And I
funny.
thought that's what I thought I was going to. But no, I like that. That meant for the medium. Yeah, as you were saying that, even I was thinking that while I am very anti-drugs, 20 to 30 years, I mean, that's someone's entire life almost, basically, at that point
Yeah,
for the distribution of drugs. It doesn't seem, it's not very aligned with even while I am against drugs, and that comes from my faith. At the same time, the faith talks about
mhm.
redemption, second chances, and judgment, and 20
Yeah,
to 30 years just is not in line with that. That is ridiculous. And then to know that they weren't, quote, grandfathered into that, I mean, that's just a true shame. So I think definitely, what would you say? I mean, that in itself is such a huge takeaway. What else would you say people would get from the book?
I think that you're going to see a lot of like just my own personal turmoil and struggle, and you're going to see my own identity collapse and me come to terms with that. And a big struggle I have in the book is actually with the people who are supporting me. And I don't want to alienate anybody because I was sent money from people. I got letters from people who were very conservative. And so I have to say that I'm incredibly thankful. Most people go to prison, they don't get a single letter, they don't get a single dollar. But I found myself in a position where people were saying, "Hey, you need to go into court. You need to fight this case. You need to. This is unjust." And people have their opinions about January 6th prosecution. Some people believe we got what we deserved. Some people believe that we were unjustly prosecuted, even up to the top of the current administration. I just had I've stepped away from it. It's not my job to decide what I did or didn't deserve in life. I feel like ultimately, compared to a lot of people in prison, I had a very light sentence, and I ended up getting a pardon from the president. So it's like, what do I really have to complain about? But I think the one thing people will probably be surprised at is the portion of me where I'm like, look, I got myself into this situation and I want to get out of it. And then I'm being pulled by people on the right who are kind of like, no, you need to fight this. You need to go into court. I had an attorney who took my case who he filed an entrapment claim against the government because they stole my phone. We had the videos and everything. So he wanted to build this huge entrapment case. And I'm like, man, like, truth be told is I agree with some of the things you're saying, but this is not the truth. Like you're trying to get me to present this as being like I was only there to get my phone back. I was a protester. I did act in a way that I shouldn't have acted. I got myself into this situation. So a big part of that was me wrestling with my family. My dad was incredibly conservative. He really, really wanted me to fight this case to the bitter end. And from the beginning, almost, I was like, I just think I should plead guilty to this and get it over with because it's the feds and we're not going to win. And a lot of people, they saw the cases and everything else, but they didn't see the inner workings of it and the struggles we have with ideologies on both sides, and then also your family issues and so on and so forth. So I think people might be surprised to see that, like, I'm actually having to swim against the current a little bit. When I said, hey, I want to plead guilty and I want to get this over with, I kind of got, I hate to say exiled, from a lot of the January 6th world and communities, because their thought process was that if every single one of us goes to trial, they can't prosecute us all. And that's just not the truth. I mean, they really can. It's the feds. They can do whatever they want.
It's not just stuff like that. You look at dating, relationships, academics, whatever it is in your life, the military service, there are all these societal expectations put on us. And all those fields that I just named have people who are living out a lifestyle as a result of those expectations rather than what they want to do, or that what they would want to do is against what their family wants for them, what mainstream media or
Mm-hmm.
social media wants for them, what their community or church community wants for them. And there's a lot of times where it can be very difficult to have this balance of not wanting to let anyone down. And people, I feel, end up letting themselves down first before others. And I've had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
episodes on the show talking about where that leads to. And so I think I also want to get to, you had mentioned addiction at some point. What role does that
Yeah.
play in all of this?
So I'm not gonna. I don't want to unpack the marriage stuff because I want to protect the woman I was with at the time. But I had a very, very difficult divorce. It was in Atlanta. There was a lot of alcohol and a lot of drugs involved.
Mm.
A lot of that's my fault, and it ended in a huge disaster. And so what I did was I just packed up my stuff into a car and I just drove all the way to Las Vegas from Atlanta, and I moved into a 300 square foot apartment. I took a job working in a nightclub on the strip, and the next thing you know, I'm using drugs every day and every night. And I
Wow.
almost my entire life I really didn't do drugs. Like until I got to Las Vegas. And it was a very dark, very lonely place. It was right before COVID. And I had a really bad overdose on fentanyl, which I didn't even realize it was fentanyl. I thought it was something else. And because I was just so naive about drugs. And I'm walking down the strip and the entire thing spins out of control. And the next thing you know, I'm screaming for help and I wake up in an ambulance. That's why I have a slight slur when I talk now because I bit half my tongue and I chipped my tooth. I
Oh,
woke up
wow.
and yeah, and it is what it is. I had a long conversation with God that night about what do you want your life to look like? Is this how you want to die? And do you want to end up, just on the ground shaking in front of people? Because that's an expected end for a guy who's behaving the way you're behaving. And I had to confront myself. And the truth is, that wasn't enough for me though. I was still in the same habits, and I still had just I was a lot of hurt and hostility inside of me. And so I ended up getting kicked out of my dad's house. It was during COVID. I moved to Austin, Texas during COVID. I'm just drinking every day in there and putting down like an insane amount of vodka. And so I get kicked out of there. I end up in Atlanta. And that's when I get arrested by the feds. I mean, that's when I went to January 6th. And then I'm on the run for 4 months and I get arrested by the feds. And so it was that period after I'm like, how much worse can you make your life, Daniel? Like you've lost your marriage, you've lost your career, you've lost your health, you've overdosed on drugs, you found yourself addicted to a bunch of things, and now you're facing 37 and a half years and you're 40 years old. I mean, that's essentially a life sentence. And your name
Right.
is just all over the media. Like, what else could you possibly do to yourself besides die right now? And I had to confront that. I had a really good friend of mine. He's a pastor. His name's Chris. He stood by my side during all this, and he kind of really held my hand. And I that's why I tell people like getting arrested by the feds was literally the grace of God for me, and it was exactly what I needed because I didn't know where my end point was going to be. Like when is this destructive, volatile behavior going to end? And facing the feds and having all that attention, it was just too much. It was just too much. And so what happened was when I went to go plead guilty, I got to a point where we'd fought with the prosecution enough that we had enough leeway in the wording that I had the right to go into sentencing asking for leniency because they were asking for a lot of time. They wanted 6 years if I took the plea agreement. So I said I had a lovely public defender from DC, a wonderful woman. She just was very in my corner. We put together a really good sentencing memorandum, but it was on me to take accountability for my behavior. And I said, okay, let's look at this. Let's take accountability not just for this, but for literally everything that's been going on in my life because this is the stopping point right here. This is a place that I can stop. And I knew in doing that, I knew I was going to get a lot of media attention. It was going to say, oh, he's an addict, or he's an alcoholic, and he's had these issues and so on and so forth. But I wrote a 4-page letter to the judge, and it was just, this is what happened. This is what happened prior to this. This is how I got involved in this. I said I see myself going to prison. I understand that's in my future. I said when I'm in prison, I intend to write down everything I did, and hopefully it'll be helpful to somebody else. And I gave it to the judge, and it was my ex girlfriend. The letter she wrote was very helpful too. But as I'm being sentenced, I'm getting yelled at by the judge, and then she pauses and she starts like giving me all this like affirmation. Like your friends say you're empathetic, Daniel. Like you work with kids, you're a martial artist, you've been helping people, you have a good relationship with somebody who's not politically aligned with you. I commend you for that. And then she's like, and the letter you wrote, Daniel, was probably one of the best I've ever read. And she started like, just, I mean, understand this is a very left leaning judge. She's synonymous with Trump. She's a senior federal judge. Her name's Amy Berman Jackson, the Honorable Judge Amy Berman Jackson. I have a lot of respect for her. So I wasn't expecting that. I was kind of expecting to be eaten alive. And now I'm standing in front of like one of the highest judges in America. And she's telling me, hey, Daniel, there's a life for you outside of this. And I'm like, oh, wow. And she said to me, I always say this, but she said to me, she goes, as far as the work of rebuilding your life, Daniel, the work is already done. You just got to go to prison now. And that was huge. I was like, wow, the truth actually set me free here. And then she gave me a 30-month sentence. She put me into a camp and she gave me a zero recidivism rate. And so like that was one of the most crucial turning moments for me was to be in a situation where I thought I was going to be eaten alive. And all of a sudden I'm getting all this affirmation and reassurance about the fact that I can get my life back together again past this, given a sentence that's manageable. Okay, go to prison, but it's only going to be a year and a half. And you're still young enough to get your career going and to get your life back together again. And so yeah, that was the role of it all, and that's why I always say that you never know exactly what God's doing, and you never know exactly what's going to turn out to be a blessing.
100%. And you remind me of there have been a lot of relationships I've been in, both romantic and friendships with people who were far extreme opposite end of where I was politically. And we had fruitful relationships. Now, ultimately, in the long run, for what I want and with my alignment with my morality, those didn't work out. But in terms of just day-to-day relationships, like I do think it is possible for people to be in political disagreements and get along. I think one of the issues now is just polarization. People are far, far left or far, far right, and it's just seeing each other as wrong, not asking questions of like, why do you feel this way? Why do you believe this? And not having conversations. And with an assassination a few months ago, we saw that the spaces we have to have those discussions are under attack. And that's
Mm-hmm.
right there is part of the issue. Like publicly and privately, we have lost the ability to just have conversation, to have respectful
Mm-hmm.
disagreements, and to lose that publicly is a huge blow. But privately in your life, ultimately, you're responsible for that, for how you react to people who are politically different
Mm-hmm.
than you, how you talk to them. And it all stems from questions. So many of us, rather than try to understand another person, we just put forward what we believe, and that's it. And I do believe in being rigid in our morality because compromise leads to the decay of our morality. But
Mm-hmm.
understanding someone's side doesn't have to be compromise. It doesn't have to be something that corrupts your thoughts. It can just be understanding them from an intellectual and emotional standpoint to make a proper decision. And I think more people need to have those conversations. And we don't see that. We see people just instantly blocking one another on social media, on phone numbers, or just blowing up. I think I've had a lot of political disagreements with people who just react violently or aggressively
Yeah.
emotionally. And we're seeing that even now in the news. It's a lot of large emotional violent outbursts. And at that point, you've done all you can do. Like if I've been in political disagreements where people just get up and walk away mid-conversation. It's
Yeah.
like I'm doing my part to try and have this conversation. And it's difficult, it's frustrating. And this goes for relationships too, especially marriages, relationships, whatever it is. You have to have the difficult conversations. And if you don't have the ability to have that, then there's no space for growth of any kind. No space
Yeah.
for any compromise, for any growth. And I think what you need to do minimum is sit there through that conversation, no matter how difficult it gets. I mean, take care of your own mental health, right? Don't sit through conversations to the point that you have a breakdown. But if you're going to step away from that conversation, it should be done so respectfully, not storming off, not throwing anything, not just a big outburst.
Mhm.
So I think we just need to get back to having that publicly and privately. And what we do in private will reflect in public, and what we do in public will reflect in private. So I think we need to see
This is
on
very true.
mainstream
Yeah.
media, I've seen a lot of unprofessionalism. We have seen growing in Congress, on news channels on both sides, more and more unprofessional language on the way they treat it.
Mhm.
Everything's becoming a meme or some kind of gimmick or game or conspiracy.
A hot take or
It,
something. Yeah.
right. And we need to get back to professionalism. I have seen some true
Yeah.
unprofessionalism from multiple presidents on both sides, from multiple political leaders in Congress. I mean, just I
Yeah.
can't believe some of these people with how much education they have, how much schooling, how much money, and the position they hold, the responsibilities hold, that they are talking like, I mean, dare I say, children. Or I know children who are more
Yeah.
professional and polite than some of these political leaders. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And I think we need to get back to those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And the premise I always begin with now is that everybody is the completion of their experiences, or the summarization of their experiences, summary of their experiences,
Right.
I guess is the best way to put it. And so it's, remember the relationship I was in, all of a sudden I'm living with like a very, very militant left-leaning woman. And so I'd sit there and I'd be like, why do you think this way? Or why do people behave this way? Or why does the LGBTQ plus community believe these things? And when you sit there, you realize like the world that she lived in is not the world that I lived in. I'm a straight white Christian male, and so my worldview is kind of predicated by my experiences and what I've done, and hers are very different. And so it's not necessarily that the way they see the world is wrong. It's that it's shaped by their experiences. And so
Right.
when they see something, it's based upon something they've gone through or something they've experienced. And the biggest issue I see is that we've gotten to a place where we dehumanize each other. We have these issues. Like I was watching the issue that happened in Minnesota with the woman, and there's so many people that were so quick to say that she's this, that, and the other, and people were demonizing the police officer. And I just look at it as a horrible tragedy. I see somebody who ended up in a situation and things happened very quickly and they escalated beyond control. And the next thing you know, something very, very tragic happened. And I don't think that's is any right to say that somebody is this, that, and the other, or they're not an actual person. I mean, you end up in a situation and the panic responses and different things kick in and adrenaline and who knows whatever happened in that situation and other situations too. And we're just everybody's quick to use it and say, okay, well, what about this?
Right.
This aligns with my political worldview. No, this part of it aligns with my political worldview. And I've gotten to a place now where I look at that and I go, wow, that's just a horrible tragedy. And I could see a lot of like the things that I was going through. Somehow I can see myself projecting that portion of it too. And so we end up in a place where it's like we're just looking to snap at each other and we're looking to call each other names. And you'll see this on my social media profile. Sometimes I'll post something and I try my very best to stay out of anything that's divisive. I just want to give my perspective. I don't come to conclusions. I just give observations based upon my experiences. But sometimes people will comment and I'm like, oh my goodness, like how do I respond to that? That's like people from the right will comment things that I'm like, that's very, very divisive what you're saying. And then people from the left will comment things that are like, you're trying to agitate people here. And I'm not here for that. And so that's the heartbreaking part is I have like friends on every side of the spectrum, like people who don't agree with me and the things I've been through, but I'm still going to care about them. I click on friends' posts and I see that stuff that's very, very left leaning, and I'm not going to get angry about that. I understand that's why you see the world that way, and you're a human being and you have a right to see the world that way. I don't necessarily agree with everything you're saying. You don't need me to agree with you. I mean, what happens if I agree
Right.
with you? I don't think so. And so, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The rhetoric is insane and it's just more and more divisive. People are becoming more and more radicalized and they're camping out in their particular groups. And the most important thing that you can do is to have a diverse and robust worldview. The last thing you really want is to have just an echo chamber of thought and belief in your life. And you can hold some principles very close to your heart. And some of those things are non-negotiables, but if you only align yourself and surround yourself with people who agree with you, you're only going to be hearing the same things over and over again. You're going to lack empathy. you're gonna have a very, very hard time understanding what other people believe.
100%. And one thing I do want to get here, very important part is you talked about where your book is at now. Or is there any ETA on that? Estimated release date? Is it looking the next couple months or what's it looking like?
If you want to end up in an infinite like an infinite loop, try and publish a book because it just seems like it goes
Yeah.
on forever and ever. So I'm in a place where it's completely finished. I'm waiting on it to come back from its final like line edit. That should have that in a few weeks. The question then becomes, do I want to self-publish this, or do I want to pursue like a hybrid publisher or like a big five if that's even possible? I'm kind of leaning more towards self-publishing. I've had two offers from some hybrid publishers. I haven't even really like put it out there yet. Like I said, this is like my 11th or 12th like interview that I've done. People are very receptive. What I did recently was I took the timetables off. I said, all right, let me stop stressing myself out about having everything completed, everything moving forward, and anticipating all this growth immediately. This is kind of a long play for me. I'd like to have it out ideally in the next few months would be good, but I'm not going to do that just to do it. I'm just going to put it out there just to put it out there. I do want to see if I can develop a little bit of an audience and see if there's some people who are interested in it and see if there's some publishers. So the best answer I can give is it's as finished as I can possibly get it, and I honestly don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll push it out on all my platforms when it does come out, just as
Thank
a
you, I appreciate that.
reminder,
Yeah.
and I'll add the link back to this episode. But I think that's something for people to look forward to because I think it's important, like I said in the very beginning, for these stories and reflections to be shared, and especially like you said, what you were involved with is so political on both sides. Yet at the end of the day, here you and I are just talking as humans, right? It's not about right or left. It's just about, as you were mentioning there, a tragic incident, right? Because you're looking at these events as like, hey, these are human beings. These are living, breathing human beings who are being affected on all ways. And so many people are so focused on this side and that side. And I think it's important we bring humanity back to the central point and focus on again what we can do in our lives and the local impact we can have. But I'm really appreciative of what you're doing. But you could have just gone and decided to quote hide for the rest of your life, but you're very open about who you are, what you've done, and you're trying to make an impact. So I really appreciate that and thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it.